So this is an 8-inch square and I have 2-inch cutouts, and then I have interfaced it with a medium weight non-woven interfacing. I use Pellon, it's called SureTailor, I think it's 950, but it's the kind of interfacing that you use to make shirt collars for like men's dress shirts. Anyway, I've got my lining pieces here and I'm going to use a 1/2-inch seam allowance. You can use a smaller seam allowance if you want it to be a little bit bigger, but I like 1/2 inch because it fits so nicely on my machine. So I'm going to seam these sides, backstitch at the ends. I'm going to leave a hole at the bottom here so that I can turn the bag later. Backstitch at the end of that hole. And if you want to make your life easier, start here at the end and then backstitch to the edge of the hole and then come back. Because then when you cut those tails in the middle to turn your bag, those tails will fall right on the inside of the bag and you don't have to worry about trimming them or melting them with a lighter. You can just leave them long because they will be on the inside. Now I have my exterior fabric. I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to leave it closed. I'm going to sew all the way across the base because I don't need that hole there to turn the outside. Now you don't necessarily have to backstitch those corners right there because they are going to be contained inside of your box bottom seams, but I do kind of just out of habit. I do like to backstitch the top though, because then when I put the bag together later, they don't peel open. All right, so I'm gonna do some trimming here. I'm just gonna trim these tails. I am not gonna worry about trimming these because they are going to be hidden inside my box bottom. You can trim them if you want to, but I don't. Now I'm going to line up my bottom seams. And the way that I make them nice and flat is I make them face opposite directions here. So this seam allowance is going that way, this seam allowance is going this way. It's okay if you have them facing the same way. It'll be a little bit thicker, but I find it best if they face opposite directions like that. It's just a cleaner finish. It's easier for pressing later. You see I pulled that up so it doesn't get caught in that seam. And then those little ends are not going to come unraveled either because they're still connected. And now while I'm here, I'm going to trim this base like that. And then I'm going to seam these box bottoms. Again, 1/2-inch seam allowance. I do backstitch at the end here because I don't want those to be coming undone. Sorry if these seams look a little messy. It's super awkward to sew with this like hammer stand right here. I'm gonna do the same thing with the exterior fabric. Again, seam allowance is facing opposite directions. I'm going to pull that little tail up so it doesn't get caught in the seam. Here we go. And again, I'm going to have a 1/2-inch seam allowance, backstitch at the ends. You'll notice I leave that first one on the machine. You don't have to do that, but because I make so many of these at once, I end up with a big long train of pieces, and then I just snip them apart when it comes time to put them together. Stitch at the end. All right. Now I'm going to snip these apart. I am going to snip this tail here that goes across the bag. If you already did that, you don't have to worry about it. Now, I am not, I dropped my scissors. I am not going to worry about trimming all these loose ends because they are all going to be tucked inside the bag. And the loose ends, when they're long like that, those seams are not going to come unraveled, and that you're never going to see those. So it makes the bag a little bit more secure, and you don't have to worry about it. All right, now to make these side seams lay nice and flat, you see how it's going this way? I'm gonna leave it going that way, and you see how the inside one is going the other way. Now, you might find that when you put it together, they both go the same way. Like that, right? One's going this way, and that one's going that way. Now, you can put it together like that, that's totally fine, as long as they are, you know, laying flat next to each other. You're not gonna have a problem with bulging seams. But if that's the case, I just turn it around, and then they'll lay opposite directions. So I'm going to pin this. I usually pin this from the outside, that's why I'm struggling here. Go. I'm gonna tuck it in there so I get a nice clean seam along the outside. You can pin some more if you want to. I have made a lot of these, so I'm pretty confident with just 2 pins. I use the free arm of my machine. That's one of the reasons I have this particular machine. If you don't have one, if you have just a flat surface, you're going to steam from the inside like that. But if your machine has a free arm like mine does, where it's a circle and you can go around it, that makes it super easy. I'm not going to backstitch here because I am going to overlap that seam, and I don't have to worry about backstitching when I'm going to overlap like that. As it goes under the presser foot and through the feed dogs, I'm going to make sure this one goes this way and that one goes that way. So it's nice and flat. And as I approach the end here, if you get a little wrinkle here, mine's not really a big wrinkle, but you can just pull it a little bit and that will solve that for you. I backstitched out of habit, even though it's not necessary there. Now, again, you don't have to trim these tails because you're not gonna see them, but since I'm here, I'm gonna go ahead and trim those. All right, so now it's time to turn the bag. Let's scoot that out of there. Enjoying the children's lullaby music in the background because my kids are always here with me when I work, and my little 2-year-old is really enjoying it. All right, now because I backstitched over here and I left the tail of the yarn like here instead of right on the end, those tails fall really nicely into the bag and I don't have to worry about trimming them. So I have this tiny little ironing board. You don't need an ironing board like this. You can achieve the exact same thing with a tailor's ham, which you can just make out of scrap fabrics. I've done that before. I have a little tiny iron here. You don't need a little tiny iron, you can use regular iron. But I make a lot of these, so I have one here for convenience. But you can use your big iron with the pointy end just as well here. Now I'm going to back stitch right here. I'm going to use about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. That's that little line on my presser foot. I'm going to back stitch here and go all the way across here. You can hand seam these together if you don't want to see the seam. I don't find that to be necessary because you don't see this seam when your yarn is in there. Now I'll show you a little trick for these little yarn tails. Got these little bits of fluff here, these little yarn tail or thread tails. Just melt them with a lighter. If you use polyester thread, if you're using cotton thread, this is not going to work. But if you're using polyester thread, so they just melt away, and it just tidies them up. Because that polyester is going to melt a lot faster than your cotton fabric is going to catch a flame. So just 1 second there with a lighter will melt that thread, and you don't have to worry about it. Now I have a little, it's just a baby food jar with a piece of sponge in it, some distilled water in there, just because that's what I have down here for my iron is distilled water. You can use whatever you want. Just to get a little grip on this end here to make a nice flat seam right here. And then I tuck in the corners, push those out like that. And then I'm going to turn my ironing board around. I'm going to use my ironing board just like a free arm of a sewing machine. And I'm gonna press that top there. Now my side seams are nice and flat because I made sure that they were sewn down like that. I don't really have to press them because they're already nice and flat. And now, turn my light off. What have I done? There we go. Now you can top stitch at whatever seam allowance you like. I like 1/2 inch for cozies. Just because again it fits my machine nicely. 1/2 inch on my machine is right on the edge of this presser foot, and I don't have to worry about trying to keep my eye on a line or anything. I just feed it right through there. Now make sure it's nice and not wrinkled underneath as you're doing that. Just give it a little tension here as the feed dogs are pulling it through. And as you're coming up on your presser foot, I like to pull these thread tails right over here just to keep them out of the way so they don't get sewn underneath. And then I just trim my tails here. You can use a lighter to clean it up to make sure you don't have any little scraggly bits there. But I don't find it's really necessary, right? And I didn't back stitch it because I overlapped those seams. So you see how it's overlapping right here. As long as you make sure you get on the same line, you're not gonna have to worry about that, okay? Now I fold down, it's about 1 inch I think, but I fold down to my thumb knuckle right here. And then I just scoot with my thumb bent like that, and it gets everything nice and even as I go along. It's not always perfect, but it's pretty close. There you go. Now you can iron this edge if you want it to be nice and crisp. You just put it on your ironing board just like you did to iron your seam. Okay, if you want to find the halfway point to iron on a tag, just fold it with the seams together, and that fold right there is halfway. So your tag would go right here.